Welcome to MINDSHOCK. This is your host, Bruce McGuire. And today, we are doing the mother of all Bigfoot podcasts. This is a question that has been put forth by coincidence theorists and so-called skeptics in the Bigfoot realm for quite some time. Where are all the Bigfoot bodies, if Bigfoot is real? And we're going to answer that question because there's a lot of them. So some people believe that there is a government conspiracy involving the cover-up of Bigfoot, in which case that would obviously include the confiscation of Bigfoot bodies. But as with anything, there are so-called whistleblowers. There are people who don't keep quiet about it. Now, what's weird is that the goofs that say, oh, how come nobody's ever said this or done this? But then the people that do, they say, oh, well, they're just crazy people. so it's like people can't keep secrets. Well, which conspiracy is... There's whistleblowers for every conspiracy you could possibly think of, including the reptilian shapeshifters that run the world. There are people claiming to have seen them shift. So if the conspiracy is true, and the coincidence theorists and the so-called skeptics are saying, well, if it was true, somebody would have said something. But then a bunch of people say something and they're like, oh, but they're crazy. So how do you satisfy the requirement? Obviously, just because someone says something, it doesn't mean it's true. But the standard someone would have said something, obviously, that doesn't work. Because people do say something for things that aren't true. And if it is true and they're not lying, how are they expected to prove it? Because if they did have smoking gun evidence per se, wouldn't they be taken out of the picture? That would prove the conspiracy, because if there was no conspiracy, there'd be nothing to cover up, and then they wouldn't be able to have a smoking gun. But if they have a smoking gun and the conspiracy's that vast and dangerous, they would be silenced. I mean, this isn't rocket science, but for some reason, coincidence theorists, they just don't do logic. They don't understand logical fallacies. They don't even have a basic fundamental understanding of how a conspiracy would work if it is true. Now, this is MINDSHOCK, and I am not alleging any conspiracy is true or untrue. The only thing we know for sure is that we don't know anything for sure. Regarding Bigfoot bodies, there have been tons of bodies reported, and there have even been samples of bodies, and there is some intertwining occurrences with the government, so-called men in black, men in suits who came to confiscate bodies. We're going to be looking at a whole bunch of cases, and we're even going to be looking at cases going farther into the past before there was a government conspiracy cover-up, and this was all out in the open, which leaves some very interesting testimony from parties involved. As always, if you enjoy the MINDSHOCK podcast and logical takes on all different topics, cryptozoology, conspiracies, true crime, feel free to donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description and support the MINDSHOCK podcast so we can get more mind-shocking content out there with logic and reason at the forefront, unlike any other mainstream source. You could also become a YouTube member right here on YouTube for exclusive streams and chats. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast, hit that bell for notifications, like and share the podcast. Let's help spread logic and reason to a world where it is quickly becoming extinct. Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcast requests. You can also be a guest on the podcast depending on your tier. So before we get to the possibly real cases, let's address and debunk the hoaxers. So, another thing coincidence theorists and so-called Bigfoot skeptics don't understand is what a control is. Because regarding things that are even real, there's hoaxes of all kinds. Hoaxers are always going to be around. I mentioned this in a previous podcast. We don't really have the metrics. Has the internet and so-called viral video culture made the prevalence of hoaxers more widespread. Because back in the day, I mean, high school kids might have gotten some, however they did it, some kind of Bigfoot prints and made tracks, or not even Bigfoot, like other monster prints. Like, what did they do? They used some kind of scuba flippers, and they would walk around and, oh, look, it's a lizard man. Just for kicks. There was no internet monetization. It was just for kicks. So there's always going to be hoaxers, both for real creatures and not real creatures. So saying, oh, look, there's a guy making fake chicken videos in his backyard, that must mean all chickens are fake and don't exist, and all chicken videos are fake. I mean, that's just silly nonsense, of course. But in the realm of Bigfoot hoaxers, Rick Dyer has a special place. He is regarded as one of the most infamous Bigfoot hoaxers, and even on the Wikipedia, it lists his occupation as used car salesman, which some people think is apt. So he's been responsible for not one, but two major hoaxes, or so-called hoaxes. Now, what's weird is Texas Monthly has called Dyer the world's most infamous Bigfoot hunter. Now, by hunter, does that mean he got frustrated and decided to become a hoaxer because he couldn't find Bigfoot? But just from the wiki here, background, Dyer is a full-time Bigfoot hunter who is a self-styled master tracker of Bigfoot. Dyer and his hoaxes have appeared in Time, Discovery News, Fox News, The Huffington Post, and CNN. Highly credible sources there. The 2008 hoax. On August 12th, 2008, Matthew Whitten and Dyer released a press release and went on Steve Cull's radio show, Squatch Detective, to announce they had a dead Bigfoot body in their possession. After initially leaking grainy footage that showed Bigfoot, they presented the carcass encased in a block of ice at a conference that was only open to the press. The two announced they found the 7-foot, 7-inch, 500-pound creature while hiking in the North Georgia mountains in June. The other thing is 7'7". I mean, with the weight, the weight seems off there. So they're 7'7" and only 500 pounds? Because, I mean, for comparison, I mean, gorillas only get up to about 5.5 feet, and they weigh up to 485 pounds. So, and again, and then grizzlies can grow to 9 feet tall and weigh up to 860 pounds. So again, if this was a female, I guess it could have been a lot lighter with the muscle mass, but those proportions seem a little off. But anyway, the two announced they found the 7'7", 500-pound creature while hiking in the North Georgia mountains in June. They also stated that they had spotted about 3 other similar creatures after making the discovery. According to Dyer, it took them a day and a half with 6 men to carry out the Bigfoot, all while being followed by other Bigfoot creatures. I mean, that sounds terrifying if true, but again, if these Bigfoot creatures are highly intelligent, I mean, so there's 6 men here. It doesn't say with 6 men. Does that include them? So 4 other men? So they're saying 6 men. So it's either 6 men total or 8 men total. If they're armed, I mean, I guess 3 other creatures might not attack them, but in general, it seems strange that they would just allow them to kidnap one of their Bigfoot. Tom Biscardi joined Whitten and Dyer for the news conference, stating, quote, "Last weekend, I touched it, I measured its feet, I felt its intestines," end quote, and lauded its authenticity. As it thawed, however, the claim began to unravel as a giant hoax. I mean, this is kind of weird. So they got the body and then they put it in a block, they froze it in a block of ice. I mean, what? 2008. And where's the video? Is there a video of them carrying it? So they did have two photos here. I mean, terrible photos, really, but continuing on here. Jerry Perino, owner of internet Halloween costume retailer thehorrordome.com, said that the costume definitely looks like our costume after viewing photos of Dyer's Bigfoot. Upon further inspection, it was confirmed that the corpse was in fact a costume stuffed with opossum roadkill, entrails, and slaughterhouse leftovers. And thehorrordome.com is still up. Cool. Okay, National Geographic called the hoax a short-lived one, as the whole affair only lasted a few days. Upon being exposed, Dyer said that an unnamed government agency confiscated the real Bigfoot body, and believing that he needed to produce something, fabricated the hoax. Okay, wow. Okay. So here's the thing. If there were no photos at all, that would actually make it even more believable, because the photos are just such crap that it just doesn't hold up. They would have had it would have been better if they had no photos at all, because then it would be more believable. So the other thing that doesn't make sense is they allowed researchers to thaw this body, which was obviously rubber, a rubber suit. So I mean, it really doesn't make any sense, because they had these so-called researchers, whoever they were, a part of a team involving Tom Biscardi. Researchers used heat to speed up the thawing of the shaggy remains. Within an hour, they realized at least part of the head was hollow, and over the next hour, a break appeared near the feet. It was a rubber foot. So, okay, I mean, that doesn't make a lot. I mean, this doesn't make any sense, though. I mean, if you're gonna do a hoax, at least say you lost the body, right? Like, I mean, would it? Because, I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. So let's look at this article here. This is New York NYDailyNews.com. Bigfoot hunter Rick Dyer admits he lied about killing the beast. By Joel Landau, March 31st, 2014. Wait, Bigfoot isn't real? Question mark. The Las Vegas man who proclaimed to have finally tracked and killed the mythical creature, who planned an international tour to reveal the body and promised to finally shut up all his detractors once and for all, has admitted to lying for the second time about killing Bigfoot. Oh, wait a second. We didn't get there yet. There's another hoax. All right, so that was the 2008 hoax. Now let's go to the 2012 hoax. So if that wasn't enough, in 2012, Dyer claimed to have killed a Bigfoot-like creature in San Antonio, Texas in early September. According to Dyer, he lured the Bigfoot out using pork ribs from Walmart, doused in a special barbecue sauce that he attached to the trees. It's all in that special sauce. Of the experience, he told Esquire magazine, quote, "We nailed him all around the trees, and then that night we heard Bigfoot came back. I chased him down in the middle of the night. I shot him once. He ran. I shot him again," end quote. He claimed that an unnamed university in Washington state had tested the creature's DNA, and told Dyer that it was an unknown species. Dyer's accomplice and self-proclaimed Bigfoot skeptic Alan Isleb, a.k.a. Muskie Allen, of Wakanda, Illinois. I mean, does he have any relation to Black Panther? Claimed to have inspected Dyer's Bigfoot in Vegas in February 2013 and proclaimed it to be the real thing. This claim resulted in many people getting sucked into Dyer's scam. Dyer called the creature Hank and started touring the body around the U.S., charging people to view it. To view the body, which lay beneath plexiglass in a wooden coffin, adults were charged $10 and children were charged $5. The sold-out tour eventually pulled in close to $500,000. Of the creature, Dyer stated, DNA sequencing, scans, autopsy, everything you can imagine, it was being done. Some in the media endorsed Dyer, including Andrew Clacy. Critics soon pointed out that Dyer had pulled off a Bigfoot hoax in 2008 and called for Dyer to release more open testing. Throughout the course of the hoax, Dyer repeatedly slandered anyone who openly spoke up about him. Many suggested his tactic was just more proof that Dyer was hoaxing again. Professor Don Jeffrey Meldrum at the Department of Anthropology at Idaho State University stated, quote, "This thing has clearly been fabricated to depict a specimen that has been dissected. It smacks of images of alien autopsy," end quote. Which, by the way, if you haven't checked that out on the MINDSHOCK podcast, I addressed that alien autopsy video as well, which is actually really, really bizarre. Responding to the controversy, team members working with Dyer on the touring and Bigfoot projects overall confronted Dyer. Andrew Clacy, a spokesperson for the project, wrote, quote, "I confronted Mr. Dyer in Daytona on my suspicions of authenticity, and he had admitted to me personally that the body of Hank was not a real body, but rather a construct of a company from Washington State which was paid for by Rick Dyer. I am available and willing to cooperate with any federal or state law enforcement investigations should they arise." Clacy immediately flew back to Australia and abandoned both the project and Dyer. With his crew leaving, Dyer announced on his Facebook page that Hank was indeed a fake. Chris Russell of Twisted Toy Box in Washington admitted that he had manufactured Hank at Dyer's request using latex foam and camel hair. Dyer had told Russell the prop was for a movie about killing Bigfoot that he was shooting, and that he also wanted a baby Bigfoot and female to be created. Russell started receiving threatening phone calls, emails, and other contact for making the prop, and so decided against making the rest of the Bigfoot family. Russell stated, quote, "I was asked to make the prop look like a poorly made, old and rotten taxidermy prop that had not been preserved correctly. Dyer did send photos and drawings taken from the internet and asked for certain features to be replicated," end quote. Dyer maintains that he actually does have the body of a real Bigfoot that he shot and killed, but cannot produce it. Oh man, is everybody still following here? So, I mean, the thing that's weird, though, coincidence theorists who are very hypocritical, I mean, government agencies hoax and manufacture conspiracies all the time, but certain gullible goofs still trust them time and time again. But when it comes to something like this, they'll say, oh, this guy did the same scam before, he can't be trusted, which is obviously logical, but they turn the blinders on when it comes to corrupt governments on the idiot box. But anyway, I mean, this is quite mind-shocking that he pulled it off not once but twice, but then admitted it. I mean, this is kind of unique, though, because a lot of these hoaxers never admit it. They try to keep it mysterious or whatever. He flat out admitted that these were complete hoaxes. Now, he's still claiming he does have a real body, which is fine, but he admitted that these are hoaxes. I mean, this is really weird. So the aftermath here, still going on the wiki. On his Facebook page, Dyer posted, "From this moment on, I will speak the truth. No more lies, tall tales, or wild goose chases to mess with the haters. I have never treated anyone bad. I'm a joker. I play around. That's just me. Coming clean about everything is necessary for a new start. From this moment on, I will speak the truth. No more lies, tall tales, or wild goose chases to mess with the haters," in March 2014. Okay, so now he's serious. I'm sure everybody believes him. Benjamin Radford, deputy editor of Skeptic magazine Skeptical Inquirer, stated, quote, "If Bigfoot researchers wish to be taken seriously, they should start by cleaning their own house. The biggest threat to their credibility is not skeptics nor a ridiculing public, but instead those who provide an endless stream of bogus claims and evidence," end quote. I mean, that's just human nature. Those are called controls. And this is a compositional logical fallacy being put forth by Benjamin Radford by claiming that a certain part of a group represents the whole group, or that anybody in the so-called group can even control that, because obviously they can't. I mean, it's like people faking degrees in academia or quackademia, whatever you want to call it. That's not academia or quackademia's fault, and they can't control that. There's always going to be people who make degrees or claim they have degrees they don't have or whatever. I mean, that's just the way it is. It doesn't make those institutions any less credible for those who believe they're credible. I mean, again, just like people practicing medicine without a license, I mean, there's been criminals who did that. I mean, there was even a famous serial killer who pretended to be a doctor and nobody caught him for how many years? Again, it's weird how these goofs hallucinate that all these fallacies are somehow legitimate. In 2013, Dyer was one of 4 Bigfoot hunters who participated in the documentary Shooting Bigfoot, America's Monster Hunters. I mean, yeah, it's kind of weird. Is anybody shocked that he hasn't come out with a third hoax? And apparently he was arrested for eBay fraud in 2016. But anyway, let's go back to the New York Daily News article here. So this article was 2014, so this is after both hoaxes. The Las Vegas man who proclaimed to have finally tracked and killed the mythical creature, who planned an international tour to reveal the body and promised to finally shut up all his detractors once and for all, has admitted to lying for the second time about killing Bigfoot. Dyer posted his confession on his Facebook page Friday. The page is currently disabled. And that is where he said, "From this moment on, I will speak the truth." In a long, rambling, typo-filmed rant, Dyer admitted he pulled off the stunt for attention and paid someone to make a fake body look like Bigfoot, and he planned to take on tour. Dyer also said he fed his haters info and admitted into hacking into one's account so they could publicly discredit him and create more controversy. What? Not trying to be a smart ass, but when I said the haters made this happen and made me money, that was the truth, he wrote. Controversy sells. In an interview with the News last month, Dyer claimed he killed an adult and adolescent Bigfoot near San Antonio in September 2012, which he lured by posting ribs around a forested area covered in deer piss. And here's the photo of the Bigfoot, which does look like a Halloween mask. The self-described best Bigfoot tracker in the world claimed this 8-foot-tall, 800-pound animal, at least he's got the weight a little bit more realistic there, was being investigated at a lab at a college in Washington State. He said scientists had done a DNA test and concluded it's an unknown species. He never produced the medical documents. Dyer claimed his tour made less than $20,000, which he paid to 2 associates. "The kids and all my fans' smiles would have been payment enough for me," he wrote. He didn't mention all the publicity he received from his lie, and as for the fans that paid to see the body on his tour, everyone that went on my tour had less than $100 in the bank with nothing going for them. Some didn't even own a car. I made their life better. I never treated anyone bad. I'm a joker. I play around. That's just me. I have made lots of people mad, but 1,000 times more smile. I mean, isn't this fraud? But Dyer doesn't appear to have learned his lesson. He goes on to claim that he did in fact kill a Bigfoot September 6, 2012. He said he doesn't have plans at this point on what to do with the real body. "The future is bright for Team Tracker, and thanks for all the support. We are making history," he said. He doesn't say why he didn't just unveil the real body in the first place, especially since he was conducting a tour to reveal the body. But that's the one thing that sort of kind of could make sense, because if he's afraid of the real body being confiscated by the government, but in that case, why announce he has a body in the first place at that point? I mean, it's just, none of it really adds up. But a former employee is accusing Dyer of what else? Lying in his statement. Andrew Clacy, who handles media requests and helps schedule his tour for Dyer, also verified his authenticity, publicly denied taking money from Dyer except for travel expenses. Dyer claimed Clacy knew of the lies from the beginning, but in a statement to the News, Clacy said he was duped by Dyer and he believed the fraudster actually killed Bigfoot. "Mr. Dyer needed me to believe the body was real, so I would contact the media and help him make money, which I did," he said. "Once I became aware of the truth, I could no longer continue in my role with Rick Dyer on moral and ethical grounds and made the decision to immediately return home to Australia to continue my business." Clacy said he now deeply regrets his relationship with Dyer and is willing to work with authorities if they choose to investigate Dyer's claims for fraud. I wish to thank all the very good people I met in the time in the U.S. and the people who were also duped by Dyer, and I wish them all the greatest successes in life as we continue our real work in trying to solve the question of Bigfoot, he wrote. This is not the first time Dyer has claimed to have caught Bigfoot and then failed to produce the body. In 2008, he promised to reveal a big Bigfoot that later turned out to be a rubber ape costume. Dyer explained that right before unveiling the Bigfoot, an unknown government agency confiscated the body and all the evidence. Having already announced his find, Dyer said he took the costume to the press conference because he felt needed to produce something. You know, I mean, we can discuss the plausibility of that. If he did make a statement, and that statement if there is a conspiracy, got the attention of a government agency to come and get the body, then let's say they did do that. But again, we have those really fake-looking photos that they look so bad. But either way, why would he continue to claim he still has a body now, though, if the government agency now knows about him even more than they did the first time? So that, I mean, again, this just does not add up. But this time, Dyer may not get off so lightly. An online petition has started on change.org by Sydney resident Mark Wilkinson for the U.S. Department of Justice to charge Dyer with fraud. He is the lowest form of human being and manipulates his naive and trusting for his own financial gain. He needs to be stopped, wrote one person who signed the petition. I mean, that's also true of every single politician. Okay, so let's move on to the possibly real Bigfoot bodies. So, for those who don't know, we actually did a MindShock podcast on the first Bigfoot photograph from Canada in 1894. And this is Lyle Billett of Victoria, Canada. We did an entire episode on this 1894 photo and a much more plausible case of conspiracy, with writing on the back of the photo, chain of custody issues, the Hudson's Bay Company involvement in a possible Bigfoot conspiracy. So make sure you check that episode out, where that's a Bigfoot body. Now, of course, we don't know what happened to that body. If there is a conspiracy, then one would think the body would have been tracked, somehow tracked, some kind of custody, some kind of analysis. So let's move on to the infamous Columbus Day storm of 1962. Either 1962 or 1963 here. Here's a copy of an article from the Valley Times, March 1963. So I guess this is referring to Columbus Day, 1962. On a clear and cold November day of last year, the crew of Griffey and Laird Company were looking for trees blocking the road from O'Brien to Grayback on the Oregon-California border. What they found was nothing short of astonishment when approaching a large downed tree. At first, it appeared that a very large black bear had fallen victim to the windstorm of October 12th. Upon closer examination of the animal, the crew saw a foot and a left arm and hand protruding from under the tree. No known species of animal could explain the body as any known animal that is native to the Pacific Northwest. It was like a large hair-covered man, only with features somewhat like a prehistoric human or Neanderthal, but larger than any known to exist. Apparently, the animal had been crushed by a large tree blown over in the storm. The proper authorities were quickly dispatched to the scene and took the animal away for further examination by forensic experts. No further word on what the examination found, but in a curious turn about face, the Forest Service is now saying no such animal was found, removed, or shipped anywhere. In the meantime, many of the people in the area have seen pictures of the dead animal and are accusing the Forest Service of trying to hide the animal from the public. All the names from the district office of the USFS were blacked out from this article. Okay, so this is kind of weird. So if there is a conspiracy, obviously the Forestry Service would be involved, and if they did confiscate a body, obviously they would deny any such body existed. So this is all classic MO of government agencies. Now, what's weird is how this article was even allowed to be run, but again, this is 1963 now, so this is before mass censorship of such things. So, and even after, I mean, certain things slip through the cracks sometimes. Again, what coincidence theorists fail to realize is that no one is alleging everyone is in on a conspiracy. Certainly not every single person that works at a newspaper, not even the editors. So things slip through the cracks sometimes. So there are reports here now, supposedly there are photos, and these photos have been seen by multiple people. And apparently there was, so if anybody is from this area between O'Brien and Grayback on the Oregon-California border, does anybody recall this? I mean, certainly there's got to be somebody. I mean, it's a long time ago now. Maybe perhaps someone's parents or some extended family who lived in that area. Was there hoopla by local people regarding this situation, and then the denial of any kind? Because let's say it was a bear or something, and then the Forestry Service denied. See, what if the Forestry Service isn't in on the conspiracy, and the men in black pretending to be Forestry Service came and confiscated the body? That way the Forestry Service would be honest in saying they never picked up a body because it wasn't them. Is that how a conspiracy would unfold in regard to that? Further reports here, and this one is going to get really, really bizarre. We are moving on to Bozo, the Minnesota Iceman. Now, this is in the quasi-hoax territory. Some people believe it's a hoax, but it's just really weird. So before we get to the theorizing, let's look at Scientific American's account. So this is blogs.scientificamerican.com. Tetrapod Zoology, The Strange Case of the Minnesota Iceman by Darren Naish, January 2nd, 2017. The modern-day corpse of a human-like hominid preserved in a block of ice encountered by researchers in the 1960s, you say? Surely the zoological discovery of the century. Regular readers will know that I recently published a book on cryptozoology titled Hunting Monsters, 2016. At the time of writing, it's only out as an ebook, but it's just a matter of weeks it'll be available in hard copy too, purely because it's an interesting story that I've promised to cover here for quite some time. Find below the section from said book on the Minnesota Iceman, a story that will be familiar and tedious to some of you and wholly novel and alien to others of you. I've added references to the text. These are not present in Hunting Monsters for style reasons, and have altered it slightly such that it works better as a standalone article. The illustrations used here also are not present in Hunting Monsters. In fact, a startling and frustrating fact about this case is that none of the pictures famously associated with it are available free under a Creative Commons license online. Everything is protected by copyright. I've noticed this about images pertaining to Bigfoot as well. There's strikingly little philanthropy going on, as goes image sharing and so on. I've therefore created some Minnesota Iceman images of my own, and I'm releasing them online as public domain images. I should also add that since Hunting Monsters was written, an English translation of Bernard Heuvelmann's text has appeared, titled Neanderthal, A Strange Saga of the Minnesota Iceman. At the time of writing, I haven't seen it anyway. Without further ado, the odd bones, hairs, and on, sometimes said to be evidence for Bigfoot or the Yeti, are a far cry from the most remarkable piece of data associated with the so-called crypto-hominids. The complete carcass of a hirsute male hominid, 1.8 meters tall, preserved in ice, and transported about the United States as part of a traveling exhibition belonging to Frank D. Hansen. At this time, late 1968, the specimen was known as the Siberskoi creature. You know what's weird too, and I haven't really gone into this in other podcasts. How much of these just rich people with private collections? How many of them do have a real Bigfoot or Yeti body? Anyway, continuing on here, the specimen was brought to the attention of cryptozoologists Ivan T. Sanderson and Bernard Hovelmans by aspiring naturalist Terry Cullen. Cullen had observed the carcass at the International Livestock Exposition's annual fair in Chicago. Hansen claimed that he was only the temporary ward of the body and that it belonged to an undisclosed owner, widely rumored to be actor Jimmy Stewart. At one time, Hansen claimed that the body had been discovered floating in a block of ice off the Siberian coast by a Russian seal hunting vessel. Later, he said that a Japanese whaling ship found the body. Later still, he said that it had been found in a deep freeze facility in Hong Kong. And later still, it was said that the animal had been shot on a hunting trip in Whiteface Reservoir region of Minnesota. For all these suggestions, the most popular idea about the body's origins is that it was collected in Vietnam and flown to the U.S. in a body bag. Hovelmans connected it with the story of a huge ape killed in Da Nang, Vietnam in 1966, supposedly close to where Hansen had been stationed during the war. That's a coinky-dink. Sanderson and Hovelmans examined the Iceman in December 1968 at Hansen's home, where it was being stored off-show for the winter. Both became convinced of its reality, so much so that they prepared detailed illustrations and planned to have the creature described in the technical literature. The body was that of a robust, barrel-chested male with a thick neck and large hands and feet. Its face was broad, flattened, and possessed a short upturned nose and prominent brow ridges. An eyeball dangled from one of the sockets, apparently resulting from a gunshot to the back of the head, and a bend in the forearm was interpreted as evidence for a fractured radius and ulna. Sanderson and Hovelmans were intrigued by its enormous hands. Its thumb was slender, tapered, and long. Its nails were flat, yellow, and of an appearance that almost looked manicured. And a heel-like pad was present on the palm's outer side, a feature suggested by Sanderson to be indicative of habitual quadrupedal behavior. At one point during the examination, the glass over its case cracked, releasing an odor described as that of decomposing flesh. So it seems like this was a real body of something, possibly an ape-like creature. Or Bigfoot. This object has been known ever since as the Minnesota Iceman. Sanderson and Hovelmans both spoke about it in the media, Sanderson making the unfortunate decision to refer to it as Bozo. This seems oddly unhelpful given its apparent belief that it was real. Hovelmans published a 1969 paper on it in a Belgian scientific journal, identifying it as a new species of the human genus that he named Homo pongoides, meaning ape-like man. He later modified this proposal, arguing that H. pongoides was a form of living Neanderthal. His ideas were explored in detail in a 1974 book, L'homme de Néanderthal est toujours vivant, co-authored with Russian historian, economist, and crypto-hominid expert Boris Porchnev. John Napier, a primatologist at the Smithsonian Institute, with a serious interest in crypto-hominids, was invited to examine the Iceman. He became sure that it was a latex model. Hansen's dodge for this was that he had withdrawn the original genuine specimen from display, mostly from fear of being found guilty of killing what might have been a form of human, and replaced it with a model. Sanderson supported this by saying that the specimen examined by Napier was obviously different from the original one he and Hovelmans had examined. So here we have multiple testimony that this was done, that the real body was replaced with some kind of fake body. Very curious here. Photos show that over the years, the form of the face and body varied somewhat. In some photos, the mouth is closed, and in others it's open, clearly revealing a complement of large teeth. Maybe there was more than one model, and some of the models looked more realistic than others, but it also seems possible that as the model used by Hansen was defrosted and frozen again for each annual outing, it would have taken on a slightly different pose and appearance each time. Well, why would it be unfrozen, though? Huh. You know, and another photo he's got here, fairgrounds and carnivals have a long history of showing snowmen or wildman exhibits. So, I mean, that's a curious point, too, because, I mean, that's been going on for over 100 years, right? 150 years, maybe even close to 200 years of just these carnivals that had these extraordinary specimens, many of which were probably fake, but who knows if there were real ones as well. The skeptical view of the Minnesota Iceman has always been that it was a hoax, the latest in a long tradition of displaying enigmatic, memorable sideshow exhibits that are implied to be real. In 2013, what appears to be the original and genuine article was offered for sale online. Today, the Minnesota Iceman is owned by Steve Boosty. When I read that fast, I almost thought it was Steve Buscemi. Of the Museum of the Weird in Austin, Texas, and certainly looks identical to the specimen discussed and illustrated by Hovelmans and Sanderson. Its hoax nature doesn't exactly leave Hovelmans or Sanderson looking all that credible as scientists. What makes the Minnesota Iceman case especially interesting within the context of cryptozoology as a whole is how it was interpreted by supporters of its reality. Thanks to Hovelman's influence, the concept of a dark-furred Asian cryptohominid with an upturned nose, distinctive facial, hand, and foot anatomy, and a barrel-shaped chest has caught on. Cryptohominid researcher Helmut Lufs-Wissowa argued in 1994 that images from ancient art were consistent with this description, and hence that knowledge of Homo pongoides has been influential throughout human history. Of course, wherever we search in the world, there are legends, stories, and often claimed sightings of wild, hairy people, so it isn't surprising that various semi-legendary Asian creatures were linked to this concept and suggested as possible representatives of the same sort of animal. A large number of Wildman reports collected from the Caucasus in the west to Mongolia in the east by cryptohominid researchers Boris Porchnev, Dmitry Bayanov, and Mary Jean Kaufman have been said to be uncannily similar to Homo pongoides in anatomy and therefore interpreted as sightings of the same exact species. In addition, more than 20 reports collected in northern Pakistan by the late herpetologist Geordie Magrenner and pertaining to a wild man known as the Bar Manu have also been regarded as descriptions of Homo pongoides, the witnesses again reporting a long list of features regarded as consistent with this creature's appearance. A herpetologist is a zoologist who studies reptiles and amphibians such as frogs and salamanders, not various cases of herpes. Okay, so continuing the article here, Magrener's investigation and analysis has been regarded as a great triumph of the cryptozoological method, and as demonstration of the fact that Homo pongoides and the Minnesota Iceman are valid biological entities. Similar, Lufs-Wissowa's ideas about hominids of this sort being depicted in art have also been regarded as providing support for the existence of this creature. But the Iceman was a model, and thus the species and the traits associated with it evaporate as anything meaningful in biological terms. Where does this leave all those reports that match it in description? We have to conclude that everything written about pongoides-like hominids encountered in ancient art and real life is erroneous, that people were picking and choosing those features that match the pongoides concept and being led astray by a mistaken assumption that it was a real animal. Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing that's kind of weird. I mean, in every area of the world, they have Bigfoot legends, myths, and sightings that continue to in some places to modern day, but up until at least recent times, the past century or so. So, yeah, I mean, this is Scientific American. So, let's go a little deeper here. So, in the book Bigfoot, The Life and Times of a Legend by Joshua Blue Booz, 2009, there's a write-up on the bozo, the Minnesota Iceman. Ivan Sanderson was on top of the world. He had cornered the market in Fortiana and capitalized on what he called the greatest story in the field of anthropology, not just of the century, but of all time. Soon, he expected, money would start to fill his coffers. Now that we've proved one of these ABSMs, even up to the point where we have now my stuff, which is popular enough with the general public, is becoming very valuable. The only problem, Argosy paid Patterson more than it did Sanderson. I feel and pretty strongly that if anybody's going to get more, it ought to be me, he complained, and then Patterson performed his usual vanishing act when the bills came due. I may be no judge of character, he told his literary agent, but my wife Alma is, and the rest of my gang are not idiots. All of us felt that this Roger Patterson was both sincere and honest as a citizen. However, he took a powder on me the minute I got his bloody documentary film made for him, and he has neither paid me my commission nor answered any of my letters since. He only owes me $75. I am getting used to people, but anybody who screws me for less than $1,000 annoys me. So more than $1,000, it doesn't annoy him, because I guess he sees that as kind of that makes sense because it's a lot of money. Sanderson's bitterness at being bilked passed is soon enough, and he's on to an even bigger story: the discovery of an abominable snowman. In December '68, Terry Cullen, an animal importer, called Sanderson at his New Jersey office and told him that a man named Frank Hansen was exhibiting a wild man throughout the Midwest. Cullen had seen the creature at the Wisconsin State Fair the previous year. A friend had seen it in Chicago a few days before. As it happened, Bernard Heuvelmans was visiting Sanderson at the time, and so together the two hunters of mysterious animals drove to Rolling Stone, Minnesota. I didn't know that Rolling Stone was a city in Minnesota. Interesting. Hansen was a fat man with a winning grin. After retiring from the U.S. Air Force, he settled on a farm and showed a restored 1918 John Deere tractor on the Carnival and Country Fair circuit. In '67, he started to display a man-like creature encased in ice. For 35 cents, gawkers could look at what was he variously billed as the medieval man, or a relic from the Ice Age. The creature sounded like a standard-issue carnival gaff, a fake exhibit to fool the rubes. Hansen, however, was evasive about the creature's origins and his motives for showing it. He told Sanderson that Russian sealers had found the body off the coast of Kamchatka, and he also said that Japanese whalers had fished the body from the sea. In either case, it ended up in Hong Kong, where Hansen's benefactor, a California millionaire, had purchased it. You know what's weird? In the Scientific American article, it kind of made it seem like he was lying about the origin and making up all these different accounts. Here, there's only two accounts. And that then it was transferred to Hong Kong. So it's not like, oh, it originated in Hong Kong. The mysterious owner had then leased it to Hansen for display at sideshows. Hansen said that he didn't know what the creature was and didn't want to know. He also said that the wild man had been examined by scientists in Oklahoma who took hair tissue and blood samples. Hansen claimed never to have heard of Sanderson before and to be unaware of the publicity surrounding Patterson's film, striking for someone in the business of displaying a wild man. If Sanderson entertained any doubts about Hansen or his creature, they disappeared when he saw the thing, as he inevitably called the wild man at first. It required but one look at the specimen on both our parts to see that we were looking at a genuine cadaver. Sanderson said he and Heuvelmans spent 2 days in the monster's trailer, hunched over a block of ice, examining the creature, drawing it, taking photos. Sanderson was certain that he could smell the rotting flesh. Heuvelmans thought that Bozo, as they had named the creature for some obscure reason, was a Neanderthal. Sanderson disagreed. It was Homo erectus, he decided. Eventually, they showed their drawings to many of the same scientists who had studied the Yeti, Carlton Kuhn and W.C. Osman Hill and George Agogino and John Napier, whipping up a frenzy of excitement. Once back in Europe, Heuvelmans published a paper on the creature in an academic journal, which caught the attention of the international press. Sanderson took to the pages of Argosy and also wrote an article for the Italian journal Genus. Coming in the wake of the Reader's Digest article about Patterson's movie, these reports further settled Bigfoot into the mass media. Napier thought that the creature sounded too chimerical to be real, but was by that point deeply involved in the study of Patterson's film and so urged the Smithsonian to take up the matter. The Smithsonian secretary at the time was S. Dillon Ripley, an ornithologist who had worked in Asia beside some of the same people who had hunted the Yeti. He approved Napier, putting out a press release noting the Smithsonian's interest, albeit a bit restrained and skeptical interest. Ripley also contacted the FBI on the assumption that Hansen might have broken some law that would force him to forfeit the body to the Institute. The Bureau politely refused to investigate the matter. As word of the discovery spread, Hansen's behavior became increasingly erratic. His story kept changing. The creature was not found in the ocean, but he said, but a river. No, it hadn't been fished from the water at all, but brought from a British exporter in Hong Kong. Yes, he admitted he had heard of Patterson's movie and with Cullen had read all of Sanderson's articles on ABSMs. He told Sanderson that Bozo's owner was mad at the publicity and had ordered the creature to be replaced with something else. He went into hiding. Worried that the body might have disappeared, Napier had the Smithsonian's publicity staff place stories in key newspapers around the country in hope that it may smoke out the owner so that a direct appeal could be made to him. Meanwhile, Cullen told Sanderson that for the price of a stun gun he could have another bozo, a claim so extravagant that even Sanderson doubted it. At the end of April 1969, Hansen reappeared and went on tour again, this time with what he acknowledged was a fabricated wild man, implying that it was a model of the original. So there's no hoax here. It looks like, I mean, according to this, he's acknowledging this time around. So the first tour throughout however many years is at the end of, was it 67? It was in 68, but did it start in 67? But anyway, at the end of April 1969, after he had disappeared, he reappears with something that he's saying is a model of the original. The new display looked different than the old, with more teeth showing, the big toe moved, and other minor altercations. Taking advantage of the publicity, he posted in large pages from Sanderson's Argosy article on the display boards around the exhibit, along with the prominent announcement, investigated by the FBI. If it hadn't been obvious before, it was now. The whole thing was a con. The point was proved when the Smithsonian's publicity staff discovered a West Coast company that claimed to have made the creature for Hansen back in 1967. I mean, is there no more info on that? Napier concluded that Bozo was just another what is it, and that Hansen deserved the Barnum Award, always one step ahead of the rest of us, he conceded. Napier excused Sanderson and Hovelman's lapse in judgment as an understandable reaction. In surreal, almost gothic conditions they had seen for what so long they had sought, and convinced themselves that the very good model was a real beast. Here's the thing, though. I mean, what's up with the new... He reappears in 1969 with a different wild man, the fabricated one. What about the original? Because that one looked different. And is it true that they smelled the rotting flesh? Interesting wrinkle here in this story. But whether Sanderson's actions were justified or not, J. Lawrence Angel, the Smithsonian's curator of physical anthropology, what a name, said that his institution would no longer collect Sasquatch reports. There was too much tomfoolery in the subject, which did the Smithsonian's reputation no good. Sanderson offered a different interpretation of the events. He agreed that Hansen seemed to be acting the part of the conman, but it was just a performance. Hansen and Cullen, he told Napier, had probably really killed a wild man, and they probably did contact him in hopes that he might increase the publicity that Sanderson generated for Bozo. Frank Hansen, the exhibitor, went into hiding and then returned with what he said was a fabricated version of the beast. Well, here's the thing. If he really is afraid of the FBI and all these things, I mean, that kind of makes sense. And to pretend that it was a con the whole time, I mean, that would make sense, too, if he's afraid of being prosecuted for murder. Or getting, whatever the case may be. Some people took him at his word and thought that he had substituted a fake for the original. Others thought that there was only ever one Bozo, and that Hansen had dropped out of the public eye long enough to melt its casing, reposition it, and freeze it again. The publicity surrounding their exhibit, but they hadn't expected quite so much publicity, including the FBI's possible involvement. They became afraid that they might be found out, they might go to jail, so they had tried to make Bozo look like a con to throw off the authorities. Maybe Sanderson even believed this Baroque theory, but if so, his credulity, as usual, served the bottom line. All of the cloak and daggerish things Sanderson told his publisher had potential value vis-a-vis the reprint of his Snowman book and potentially much more so for a sequel. The story had everything short of straight rape. What? By maintaining the mystery surrounding Bozo, by refusing to concede that he had been conned, Sanderson could wring a few more nickels out of the subject, as could the men's magazines and tabloids. That the Minnesota Iceman was a hoax hardly slowed Bigfoot's return to the mass media. A few months after Hansen took the wild men on tour again, the tabloid National Bulletin filled in the one part of the story Sanderson felt was missing, running an article titled, quote, "I was raped by the abominable snowmen," end quote, about a young Minnesota woman who killed the monster after being ravaged. Later, Sanderson arranged for Hansen to publish a story on Bozo for the men's magazine Saga, anything to keep the story going. In the article, Hansen offered yet another account of Bozo's origins. He said that he shot the beast while hunting, froze it, and then decided to take it on tour. He had a fake made because he worried that the Air Force would cut off his pension if it found out that he had killed a man-beast. When the authorities started to investigate, he replaced the real creature with the fake one. The tale ended with the exact ambiguity for which such magazines strived, and which was a boon to Sanderson's mystery-mongering. There will surely be skeptics that will brand this story a complete fabrication. Possibly it is. I am not under oath, and should the situation dictate, I will deny every word of it. Okay, so are these eccentrics just playing games here? Because, again, what coincidence theorists don't realize is that, let's say it is real. Would some random eccentric who doesn't want people to think it's real play these kinds of games, or do they not care? I mean, these eccentric millionaires, I mean, they kind of play by their own rules, and, I mean, this story is just really bizarre across the board, but it can't be denied that this was something, and it was toured publicly, and many people saw it. So even if it was just a random ape, it was something that was killed if it was a real creature. Now, to those that say, wait a second, there are no apes in Vietnam. Well, first of all, it could have been sourced from somewhere else. But if we believe that it is an ape, we have to go to the mystery of the Vietnam apes. So here's an interesting article, April 5th, 2019, The Rock Apes, the cryptids that supposedly once plagued GIs, by Jay Hemmings. This is on warhistoryonline.com. Sightings of rock apes by Viet Cong and NVA troops were also common enough that an NVA general organized an exhibition in 1974 to try to capture or at least kill one. Everyone has heard of cryptids, mysterious creatures, the existence of which is disputed by mainstream science, such as the Loch Ness Monster, the Sasquatch, the Yeti, or the dinosaur-like Mokele Mbembe of the jungles of Central Africa. While rock apes, or batuts, as they are called in Vietnam, batututs, as they are called in Vietnam, are nowhere near as well known as the aforementioned cryptids, sightings of these mysterious creatures by American troops in the jungles of Vietnam throughout the course of the Vietnam War were surprisingly numerous, with many witnesses giving extremely detailed accounts of the sightings. One particular hill in Vietnam was the site of so many rock ape sightings that it became known as Monkey Mountain. While no corpses of these strange creatures were ever recovered or any clear pictures taken of them, the fact that the sightings were so widespread and common throughout the war makes them worthy of at least an investigation. Rock apes were so named because of their supposed propensity for throwing rocks, usually in retaliation, though, after rocks were thrown at them first. They were also said to toss grenades hurled their way back at the throwers on occasion. And rock throwing is curious because that's also described in many a Bigfoot account all over the world. Described as being up to 6 feet tall and strongly built with long limbs and protruding stomachs, the rock apes, or batututs, were said by witnesses to be covered in brown or reddish-brown hair. They were also thought to live in troops troops, rather than living a solitary existence, and their habitat was confined to remote areas of the jungle, far from human habitation, areas that the Vietnam War had opened up. At first, the description of these creatures seemed to point to the fact that they may have simply been misidentified orangutans. But while orangutans once did inhabit Vietnam, they became extinct there thousands of years ago. Also, much of what troops in Vietnam reported about the rock apes doesn't really match typical orangutan behavior. While orangutans are sometimes social animals, they spend far more time foraging alone. Another possible candidate for misidentification in the is the northern white-cheeked gibbon, which is native to Vietnam. Like the mysterious rock apes, these gibbons live in large social groups and spend most of their times in the trees, but the size descriptions don't match up. Gibbons are far smaller than the 6-foot heavily built rock apes, with male white-cheeked gibbons weighing an average of 20 pounds. Some rock ape sightings, however, may have been gibbons because the rock apes in question were said to only be around 3 feet tall. Okay, so a whole bunch of different sightings. Some of them are short, some of them are tall. Sightings of rock apes by Viet Cong and NVA troops were also common enough that an NVA general, General Hoang Minh Tha, organized an expedition in 1974 to capture or kill at least one of these legendary creatures. The expedition was unsuccessful, though, and no hard evidence for the existence of the rock apes was found. Another expedition organized by Professor Vo Q of the Vietnam National University was similarly unsuccessful. However, strange human-like, but not human, footprints were found in the jungle in 1970 by Professor Tran Hong Viet of Hanoi's Pedagogic University. He made casts of the footprints, but no further evidence of the rock apes' existence. Interesting. Something quite striking about the many sightings of the rock apes reported by American troops is the fact that these creatures showed little to no fear of humans. They displayed this trait to such an extent that they startled troops on patrol in the jungle, would allegedly often happen on rock apes at a distance of a few yards, often getting quite a fright, as though they had just come across an enemy patrol rather than a troop of monkeys or a group of apes. This apparent lack of fear of humans could be explained by the fact that rock apes, if they did exist, inhabited ranges that were so usually far away from humans that they saw them as no threat, or if reports about their large size were accurate, that they saw human beings as too small or weak to present a significant threat to them. On at least one occasion, in fact, a large troop of rock apes was said to have attacked a group of Marines en masse. I'd like to see more of these reports. I mean, these seem to be all second or third hand. An explanation put forth by skeptics to explain away the rock ape phenomenon is all these creatures were mere hallucinations, conjured up in the troubled imaginations of young men who were in hostile, inhospitable environments and under extreme stress, with their lives under constant threat, the perfect sort of environment and conditions for the young brain to conjure up illusions. But the weird thing is if these were spotted in all different areas, including by Vietnamese soldiers as well, I mean, that doesn't really make any sense. And why wouldn't they be conjuring up different visions? And I mean, this is before incredibly easy communications and cell phones. I mean, it's not like troops, I mean, they might have been communicating with command, but they weren't communicating with each other in various remote regions. So it's, yeah, I mean, that doesn't really work. Also, the prevalence of marijuana use may have served to further prime the troops' minds for illusions, even though it is not a hallucinogenic drug. And again, why would they be hallucinating the same exact thing? That doesn't make any sense either. And why would the Vietnamese soldiers be hallucinating that if they're not on marijuana? While a true psychedelic drug like LSD would certainly have produced the kind of visual hallucinations that would account for rock ape sighting, again, not really. I mean, if it was one guy, sure, but when you have all of these reports from different parts of Vietnam and also enemy soldiers also reporting this, I mean, that doesn't make sense. It was not widely used by troops in the war. Okay. So, what ultimately is the truth about the mysterious rock apes of Vietnam? Were they misidentified orangutans or gibbons? Were they simply hallucinations conjured up by extremely stressed and troubled young minds? Were they an entirely new species as yet undiscovered by science? Until some hard evidence is found, we can't really give any of these questions a definitive answer. Perhaps some lucky researcher will come up with something and surprise the world. After all, the existence of the giant squid, the mythical kraken, long thought to be nothing but a legend, was proven to be real. Until then, though, stories of rock apes remain just that, stories. And another point, it was real the whole time. It's just certain people didn't believe the stories of them. Okay, so... Also, another interesting point, supposedly locals in Vietnam say that they avoid going deep into the jungles of Vietnam because of these creatures. Huh. Another interesting story here is that supposedly rock apes are not Bigfoot. They were kind of like big apes. And that certain troops saw both rock apes and also Bigfoot. So these are separate entities. Again, not falling for black and white logical fallacies. I'm going to go over this story from wearethemighty.com, written by Blake Stillwell. This is the story of U.S. troops who think they saw Bigfoot in Vietnam. Posted recently here, April 23rd, 2022. In the Kon Tum province of Vietnam, near the borders with Laos and Cambodia, there were many reports from U.S. troops on patrols of strange, not quite human but not quite ape creatures the locals call Nguoi Rung, or the people of the forest. In other words, Bigfoot. Gary Linderer was on a 6-man patrol with the 101st Airborne's long-range reconnaissance patrols. While struggled through the underbrush, he ran into deep-set eyes on a prominent brow, 5 feet tall, long muscular arms. The creature walked upright with broad shoulders and a heavy torso. His battle buddies told him he just saw a rock ape, but Linder had seen rock apes before. This was no rock ape. Like the Yeti in the Himalayas and the Sasquatch sightings all over North America, the Nguoi Rung is an oft-told tale in the area, but despite endless sightings and folklore attached to the semi-mythical creature, no concrete evidence exists. Linder wasn't the only witness either. Army Sergeant Thomas Jenkins reported his platoon was attacked by these apes throwing stones. So we do have all of these reports here with names on them, which is quite curious. I mean, there's a lot of accounts here. So apparently, yeah, Vietnamese soldiers also saw these individuals that they called forest men, and that these creatures attacked their soldiers as well. And also on Monster Quest, Vietnam vet Larry Wilson was a helicopter pilot. And in December 1970, he flew over a valley in a ridgeline and he saw an ape man shaking a tree. He said the skull was flat on top, the size of a soccer ball, had facial features like a man, and no tail. He had a clear view of the creature and was certain it was an ape man. Here's another account here. Special Forces Night Drop. Encounters with Nguoi Rung, Vietnam. No specific location given. This was a black op. This was told to Steve Williams in June 96. It occurred either in 1967 or 1968. For a period of 3 nights, they heard choking and gurgling noises. On the 4th day, they found the upper half of a decomposing Sasquatch. It had been blown in half by something not by them. This was apparently the noise they heard. It was due to its mate, possibly. This was the speculation that was circulating. They could see into the body cavity, spine, lungs, and such. All was crawling with bugs. There was shorter hair on the huge head. The eyes sunk back an inch and a half from the brow line. It had long arms, very large and long fingers. One hand was still wrapped around a branch it was clenching when it died. He didn't say what color it was, but did mention that it had a flat nose. If the creature had its legs, the estimated height was around 8 feet tall. There was no sign of the lower half of the body. They were able to see the teeth, all flat, well-formed molars, except the canines, which were longer and pointed. Seemed adapted to living in the forest with long arms and fingers, or perhaps just build night nests like gorillas sometimes do. Wow. I mean, that's sad in its own way, too. These Sasquatch creatures caught in the Vietnam War, possibly getting blown up by grenades or whatever, or mines. I mean, that's crazy. But going back to wearethemighty.com, this is, so they mentioned Jenkins's report here, but this goes back to the actual Sasquatch here, Gary Linder. And it just goes over the info I went over before. In 1969, McKinnon, zoologist John McKinnon, went to investigate the region. He called the area a tiny, pristine corner of the world unknown to modern science. In 1969, McKinnon discovered man-like footprints in Borneo's jungles, which the locals called Batatut. While much of the evidence surrounding the existence of these apes is anecdotal, McKinnon, known for his discovery of new mammal species in Vietnam, believes there is a possibility the existence of a previously unknown ape species is real. So yeah, that's the rock apes of Vietnam, and possibly not the Sasquatch or forest men. Okay, so let's move on to the Bosburg account. 1969. There's a write-up here on historylink.org by Virginia Story, posted October 31st, 2006. Sasquatch tracks are sighted in Bosburg in Stevens County on November 24th, 1969. On November 24th, 1969, Joe Rhodes of Colville in Stevens County finds Sasquatch tracks in Bosburg. Sasquatch, or Bigfoot, is a seldom or possibly never seen, rather enormous alleged beast, possibly hominid, that leaves large footprints, unless these footprints are left by something else. Sasquatch is the Salish word for wild man. Rhodes' discovery of Bigfoot prints will lead to extensive searches and at least one hoax. Investigations will prove inconclusive. Exciting sightings. There's a long history of Sasquatch sightings in the Pacific Northwest. Native American legends, fur trader David Thompson in 1810, settler Elkanah Walker in 1840, and many others have reported evidence of a large hairy beast inhabiting mountains and forests. Logger Albert Ostman claimed in 1957 that he had been captured by a Sasquatch family in British Columbia in 1924. Other reports from the 1950s placed the Sasquatch near Jasper, Alberta, and in Northern California. One account had Sassy making off with a 750-pound truck tire without taking the trouble to roll it. Roger Patterson filmed a Sasquatch in California in 1967. I want to know more about that tire. That's weird. Silver and lead mines originally attracted early settlers to Bosburg, population 800, in 1892, in Stevens County along the banks of the Columbia River just south of the Canadian border. When the minerals ran out, Bosburg was abandoned and became a ghost town. While disposing of his trash at a community garbage dump, on November 24th, 1969, Joe Rhodes spotted large footprints at the dump and reported his discovery. Sasquatch hunters excitedly descended upon the area. Renee Dahinden, a renowned Sasquatch hunter, and others searched the area. They hung fresh meat and fruit lures 6 feet up in trees and scoured the countryside. On December 13th, searchers found more tracks close to one of the meat lures. The left footprint measured 17.5 inches long, 6.5 inches across the ball of the foot, and 5.5 inches across the heel. The deformed right foot, slightly smaller, had 2 lumps on the outer edge, and a third toe that was either badly twisted or missing. The little toe stuck out at a sharp angle. chasing footprints. In all, the Sasquatch hunters found 1,089 footprints, ranging from near the Columbia River, across the railroad and main highways, over a 43-inch high wire fence, across flatland, and halfway up a hill. Okay, hold on a second. So, I mean, that's a lot of footprints for a hoaxer or a prankster to make. I mean, think of the dedication one would have to do. One would have to possess to make that many fake prints. The footprints then retraced their path and disappeared into the river. 5 days later, a U.S. Border Patrolman found similar tracks on the other side. Okay, so these are a whole bunch of different people finding these tracks. 2 months into the search, prospector Joe Metlow claimed to have possession of a live Sasquatch. After a merry chase consuming time, money, and credibility, Metlow's claim proved to be false. This brought the Sasquatch hunters full circle back to the original footprints. How did they determine his claim to be false, though? British anthropologist let's say the claim was real, and then if there is a government conspiracy involving Bigfoot and a cover-up, they confiscate it, and then they just brand him a loon. Oh, all of a sudden there's no Sasquatch. Oh, he was lying. Is that how that would unfold if there was a conspiracy or cover-up? See, coincidence theorists, I mean, it's like they don't have the mental capacity to consider the possibility that if there is a conspiracy, not that there is, not that anybody needs to believe there is, but if there is, how would it operate? British anthropologist Dr. John Napier, former curator of primates at the Smithsonian, examined casts and photographs of the Bosburg footprints and identified the right foot deformity as Talipus equinovanus, or clubfoot. Because of the way the heels were defined in the footprints, he concluded that the cause was probably an early childhood injury. He concluded, quote, "It is difficult to conceive of a hoaxer so subtle, so knowledgeable, and so sick who would deliberately fake a footprint of this nature. I suppose it is possible, but it is so unlikely that I am prepared to discount it." I mean, not to mention over 1,000 of them. I mean, he went on to say, either some of the footprints are real or all are fakes. If they are all fakes, then an explanation invoking legend and folk memory is adequate to explain the mystery. But if any of them is real, then as scientists we have a lot to explain. Among other things, we shall have to rewrite the story of human evolution. We shall have to accept that Homo sapiens is not the one and only living product of the hominid line. And we shall have to admit that there are still major mysteries to be solved in a world we thought we knew so well, end quote. I mean, that's assuming evolution is even real. But anyway, okay. Faking footprints. Upon his death in 2002, the family of Ray L. Wallace admitted that he had made the giant footprints in 1958 that began the legend of Bigfoot in the Pacific Northwest. A friend had carved the 16-inch alder wood feet he used. Just because these 1958 footprints were fake, though, doesn't mean that all of the footprints that have been found were fake. I mean, this is also, like, again, coincidence theorists. I mean, they just, and the scientism cultists, they don't comprehend that people hoax everything. I mean, there's people making fake bear videos. I mean, if you're making a movie about a bear mauling people, you're going to have a fake bear. That doesn't mean there aren't real bears out there. I mean, it's really weird. In 2004, Bob Hieronymus confessed that he posed as the Sasquatch in Patterson's '67 film. Philip Morris, a North Carolina gorilla suit specialist, claimed to have sold a Sasquatch costume for $435 to an amateur documentary filmmaker named Roger Patterson. And again, I went over all of that, and if you look at the video, I mean, you could see the ripples, the muscle ripples in the remastered footage. Anybody that hasn't checked out M.K. Davis's work on Bigfoot, check that out. I mean, the remastered high res, I mean, you can clearly see muscle ripples in the suit. I mean, this is unlike any suit ever developed. It's not even for that time. I mean, there's no suit today that can do that. I mean, it's 2022 now, so, I mean, I haven't looked at it now, but as of, like, let's say 5 years ago, there was no suit like that had ever been presented. Not to mention the ratio of limbs. So the arms are just so long. And then he's also moving the hand, so it's just, unless he had some kind of weird device to extend the arms that he could also control. I mean, this is complicated stuff. Now, I'm not saying that the video is real, but I'm saying there might be just the fact that the suit hasn't been produced, because they produce like the fake looking suits, like Planet of the Apes type suits. That doesn't look anything like what's in that video. So the other thing is what a lot of the goofs don't realize. You have, let's say Roger Patterson is like a total fraudster hoaxer. So he's buying fake suits, he's planning all these fake videos, and then he's going on these hikes. Let's say he's even faking footprints. And then he happens to see a real one, so he films it. I mean, how does him being a hoaxer, and I'm not saying he is, but if he was, how does him being a hoaxer disprove the real? Because if Sasquatch is real, it's not going to magically not be real just for the hoaxer and be real for all these other people citing them. It's just weird. I mean, the goofery of coincidence theories is really bizarre. All right, so let's continue here. Believers keep believing. Grover Krantz perplexed many because he was an established scientific researcher who studied Bigfoot. A physical anthropologist at Washington State University, he undertook Bigfoot as a scientific problem that needed to be solved. He initially believed Bigfoot to be a hoax, but his studies convinced him otherwise. Even though he studied Bigfoot for 30 years and believed Bigfoot existed, Krantz could never prove it. No Bigfoot body has ever been found, allegedly, nor are there any confirmed hair samples or scat, allegedly. No evidence at all acceptable to the scientific community has come to light. Nevertheless, many people continue to believe that Sasquatch exists. They continue searching. So all of those last statements are disputed because they do have hair samples and all these things, and even DNA samples. And again, if there is a conspiracy, they would obviously cover that up. So all of the real samples would have been confiscated if there's a conspiracy. So, I mean, I still have to do an episode on Melba Ketchum, the director of DNA diagnostics. And this is a doctor who has Dr. Melba Ketchum, who states she does have DNA of Bigfoot. So Ketchum is a scientist who did a 5-year study using DNA sequencing to allegedly prove this unique DNA of Bigfoot. And this was supposed to be a peer-reviewed study, and there's a lot of funny business. I mean, there's emails that have been leaked that showed that this was all compromised and intentionally railroaded. So this is kind of the problem, because if there is a conspiracy, they, and the whole point of the conspiracy, a high-reaching government conspiracy, like we've seen before in many other things. I mean, it takes many, many decades for the truth to come out. I mean, even JFK, they've still not released all the files, but to all the coincidence theorists who hallucinate that the government does not engage in conspiracies, I mean, there's a laundry list. I mean, MK Ultra comes to mind, the Tuskegee experiments, the poisoning of St. Louis, where the military just sprayed poison in St. Louis. I mean, it's all public now. I mean, it's not really talked about on the idiot box, but this isn't hidden anymore, but the coincidence theorists just pretend and hallucinate these things aren't real. And then they just say it can't be real for Bigfoot either. And then they cling desperately to their own mental incapacity to consider possible motives. I mean, it's kind of a waste of time to even talk about motives other than just musing in terms of scientific evidence. Motive doesn't really matter. Like, if Bigfoot's real, it's real. Whether the government conspiracy to cover it up and confiscate bodies, if that's what they're doing, that's what they're doing. You examine the evidence for that. The possible motives, I mean, again, unless you have those high-level clearances in government, you wouldn't know what the motive would be. So it's really weird how coincidence theorists think that the motive would be public. If the motive was that public, there wouldn't be a need for the conspiracy in the first place. I mean, these are all very basic concepts, but of course, coincidence theorists just have way too much trouble with them. So let's get further into this. So there's a couple more details here. This is actually on WashingtonState.fandom.com regarding Bosburg, an unincorporated community sometimes referred to as a ghost town. in Stevens County, Washington. Between the 1800s and 1959, in 1888, silver was discovered in the hills above the northern part of the Columbia River. The Young America Mine was established and drew miners and their families. Soon, the mining company established a stamp mill, and the steady increase in population prompted the development of a small town by the name of Millington. Bosburg had a population of 800 in 1892. The town was once named Young America and Millington. In 1892, it was renamed to honor two of the town's citizens, Chester S. Boss and John Berg, B-E-R-G-H, even though Bosburg is spelled B-O-S-S-B-U-R-G. Chester S. Boss came west from Michigan after fighting in both the Civil and Indian Wars. He was the first postmaster and storekeeper and was a member of the first school board. John Berg was an influential pioneer and a clerk for the school board. The town produced lead and silver from established mines. However, when mining operations eventually slowed, financial issues arose. A ferry system across the Columbia River was established and a sawmill was built for lumber operations. The cable ferry, known as the Young America Landing, shuttled prospectors and freight wagons bound for mining fields in British Columbia across the Columbia River. The ferry was not alone on the river. It was sometimes accompanied by kootenai canoes of the local Native Americans. Several Bosburg newspapers were published, notably the Bosburg Journal from 1893 to 1910 and the Bosburg Herald, which was founded and published in 1910 for only 1 year. Following the construction of the Grand Coulee Dam, the rising waters of the Columbia only took the west part of town. After the mining era passed and the population decreased rapidly. In 1956, the school district was dissolved and the students were sent to Marcus and then eventually to Kettle Falls. 1960 to the present. In 1969, there was the discovery of the footprints in the snow of a supposed Sasquatch known as Cripplefoot, followed by several other legends. In January 1969, Joe Metlow, a prospector, told Bigfoot hunters he had a Bigfoot immobilized in an abandoned mine shaft and that he had sold it. The Bigfooters said that they would top your best offer, and a bidding war ensued. John Green, a Canadian Sasquatch researcher and a journalist and editor in his day job, came and got involved in a way that offended Dahinden. Metlow declined to give anyone a peek for $1,000. Bids topped out at $55,000, which called his bluff, and interest fizzled when he wouldn't bite. Again, does that mean it's a hoax? Because if he's going around bragging, if there's a conspiracy, government agents could swoop in and pick it up. I mean, this isn't new. I mean, if you believe in the alien conspiracy and alien bodies, I mean, the Men in Black would have they run a tight ship with that stuff. They wouldn't let private citizens, especially private citizens going around bragging. I mean, word would get around and they would probably confiscate the entity. On November 24th, 1969, large human-like tracks with a crippled-looking right foot were found near Bosburg Town Dump. Earlier that year, a woman had reported seeing a Sasquatch in a nearby location to the police. The track maker was believed by some to be an injured Bigfoot and was dubbed by the locals as the Bosburg Cripple. That's not very nice. It is now known as Cripplefoot. On November 27, Bigfoot researcher Renee Dahinden arrived to investigate, but by then, the tracks had mostly been trampled by sightseers. Why would they trample the tracks? Dahinden photographed and cast the best print he could find. He was joined for 3 days by another searcher, Bob Titmus, who returned about a month later. After looking for 2 weeks for new evidence, Sasquatch searchers Ivan Marks, a Bosburg resident, and Renee Dahinden finally found it. On December 13, 1969, they discovered 1,089 giant human-like tracks in the snow leading to, from, and across a river near Lake Roosevelt, near Bosburg. They were joined by anthropologist Grover Krantz, who took photos and made casts, and later intermittently by Patterson filmmaker Roger Patterson and his assistant Dennis Jensen, who stayed full-time. Casts and or photos of the tracks were later studied by primatologist John Napier and anthropologist Jeff Meldrum. Those scientists became convinced of the tracks' authenticity. Renee Dahinden, a notable Bigfooter, was also impressed by the tracks but was suspicious of certain circumstances. One circumstance was that before he and a passenger had seen the tracks, driver Marks pulled over, got out, and walked off, returning shortly thereafter and explaining that they had to leave immediately to retrieve his camera equipment since he had just found tracks. This was just after they had passed an empty Jeep parked beside the road, whose inhabitants Renee considered might have been in the process of returning from their track making. The Jeep was gone when they returned, but ultimately he accepted the tracks as authentic. How long would it take to make 1,089 of these tracks with a normal left foot and a deformed right foot of these size? Ivan Marks phoned Renee Dahinden on October 1970 and said, "I've got a film of the Cripplefoot." Bigfooters flocked back to Bosburg. After viewing his film, nearly all were convinced of its authenticity, and a bidding war for rights ensued. However, Bigfooter Peter Burns paid attention to a couple of children who had been saying that they knew where the film had been shot. When he arrived there, he discovered that the features of the site were inconsistent with what Marks had said about the circumstances of the filming and the height of the subject. Subsequent investigations turned up more red flags, and belief in the film evaporated. Peter Byrne wrote a detailed account of the episode, as did Michael McLeod. The Bosburg Cemetery has several unmarked graves, as records were poorly kept. Okay, so let's go to a deeper account. This is BigfootEncounters.com on Bosburg. The Bosburg, Washington cripple tracks, the way the saga unfolded, and photographs. Krantz and Dahinden examined all 1,089 tracks in the snow, November 24th, 1969. I mean, these are huge. These are huge prints. Wow. In addition to the discoveries in Bluff Creek, California, in years prior to 1969, new centers of Sasquatch activity took shape elsewhere. The most notable of these reports occurred in Bosburg, in the eastern part of Washington state, just south of the Canadian-U.S. border. The Bosburg tracks had a rather special claim to fame. Accordingly, the late Renee Dahinden dictated the events as they unfolded to Don Hunter in their book Sasquatch in This Order. In late November, a phone call came from John Green telling him that down in Bosburg, Ivan Marks, late of the Slick expedition, was hot on the trail of what appeared to be a crippled Sasquatch. By now, not one to be exploded into the hunt at every mention of a track, Renee Dahinden called Ivan Marks and discussed what had been found. He took 3 days to consider the details and then took off for Bosburg. Joe Rhodes, a resident butcher from nearby Colville, Washington, had first found the tracks November 24th, 1969. The tracks were in the soft soil near the Bosburg community garbage dump, and one foot appeared to be badly crippled. It was being speculated that the creature was handicapped badly enough to force it to scrounge off man's kitchen scraps for a living, a theory which Renee rejected. When Renee arrived, it was to find the ground and most of the prints badly trampled by the dozens of locals who had been drawn to the scene when the news leaked out. The site was in the area of several Sasquatch sightings reported earlier that year, during one of which a woman had rushed into the sheriff's office, alarmed and frightened by 2 of the creatures she had seen on the highway, the main road from southeastern British Columbia down to Spokane. 2 deputies had made a casual check of the area, but had spent most of the time ridiculing the woman's story before an officer of the Border Patrol. That is, they had scoffed, as the Border Patrol told it, until they noticed it was growing dark, at which stage, showing definite signs of nervousness, they had left. Well, the other thing is, too, I mean, obviously there's different people out there. Some people want attention. But a normal law-abiding citizen, are they really going to waste their time running into a sheriff's office in hysterics? Because, I mean, if they want their name, if they really want the attention of their name out there, I mean, they're not going to remain anonymous. I mean, it's just, yeah, the way coincidence theorists to try to explain some of this stuff, the mental gymnastics they do, I mean, it's kind of hilarious. Renee found one good print, which someone had protected by covering it with a cardboard box. It was a right foot and clearly showed signs of malformation. He photographed it and cast a plaster mold. The next few days he spent surveying the area and people who lived there, talking with all he met, making trips into the bush, and generally getting the feel of the whole situation. Within a few days, Bob Titmus, a taxidermist and late leader of the abortive Tom Slick expedition, who had been living in Kitimat, British Columbia, some 700 miles north and west, joined him. The actors were gathering, and the performances that would ensue were perhaps foreshadowed by Titmus's behavior immediately following his arrival, and which Renee describes as, quote, "He went out and bought an 8-pound slab of beef and hung it on a tree. I believe he was sitting out there at night in his panel truck watching the meat and thinking that if this thing was a cripple and was living off the garbage dump, when it came along he would just grab it by the arse and throw it in the truck and run off home with it," end quote. Arse spelled A-R-S-E. I mean, here's the thing though, that's actually a pretty good idea. I mean, trying to get a non-crippled Bigfoot is going to be tough. I mean, just judging by the reported size and abilities, I mean, a crippled Bigfoot would probably be the best bet of a Bigfoot researcher trying to get evidence of Bigfoot. Titmus had provided the Sasquatch's main course. Trotting along with the desert came one Norm Davis, a radio station owner turned Sasquatch hunter for the time being. He hung a basket of fruit in a neighboring tree, carefully suspending it a measured 6 feet from the ground, the height which, presumably, would afford the Sasquatch maximum viewing of the selection of goodies. Renee watched the antics, interested to the extent that they demonstrated once more the kind of frivolous approach he had become used to dealing with. After 3 days, when the meat was about ready to make its own tracks and the bloom was off the fruit, Titmus gave up in disgust and went home to Kitimat. Renee, intrigued by the one crippled print and anxious to stay, made a deal with Davis. He would live in a trailer owned by the radio man and in lieu of rent would show the Patterson film and talk about the Sasquatch to local service clubs and other interested groups. The crippled print bothered him. He had never seen anything like it, and the more he considered it, the more unlikely it seemed that it could be anything but genuine. Davis's trailer was moved into Ivan Marks's property, and the hunters took up the pursuit. On the morning of December 13th, a Saturday, they found what they were looking for. Several inches of snow had covered the ground that morning when Renee and Ivan Marks and a young local man named Jim Hopkins set out in Marks's car to check out an area along the banks of the Roosevelt Lake, the reservoir for the Grand Coulee Dam. They checked the bank for about 4 miles, examining spots where meat scraps had been dropped by Renee earlier in off-the-beat locations, but found nothing. Near a railway crossing where the railroad and the highway run close to the Columbia River, they stopped, and Marks climbed out to check a small meat cache a little way along a side road. Just before stopping, they had passed a Jeep parked by the roadside. Marks was away from the car only seconds before he came racing back. "Bigfoot tracks," he shouted. Renee was filling his pipe. He kept on filling it, peering over the bowl at Marks, waiting for the kicker, the grin that would say, "Okay, joke over." It didn't come. Instead, Marks jumped into the car, whipped it around, and headed back down the road, rapping out in his excitement that he needed photographic equipment. Dahinden's first thought as they soared down the highway was of the people in the Jeep they had passed. Hyper alert to the possibility of hoaxers, he considered them immediate suspects. With this in mind, he told Jim to check the Jeep's license plates and Ivan to look for anyone that he might recognize in the vehicle. Between them, they were able to identify the occupants and later asked them if they happened to have seen the tracks. Yes, they had said. And what had been their response? "We got the hell out of there fast." The three were quickly down to Marks's place and back to the tracks, cameras, and, in Renee's case, a gun cocked and loaded for Sasquatch. Now, for the first time, Renee saw a full spread of the cripple's tracks. They were, and are still, among the most convincing, tangible evidence to be turned up in his years as a Sasquatch hunter. The left footprint measured 17.5 inches long, 6.5 inches across the ball of the foot, and 5.5 inches across the heel. The right one was 16.5 inches long, 7 inches across the ball, and 5.5 inches at the heel. The right foot was deformed. The third toe was either badly twisted over or was missing, there being only a slight impression in the snow at its base. The little toe stuck out at a sharp angle, and the whole foot curved outwards and showed 2 distinct lumps on the outer edge. A careful count eventually showed that there were 1,089 clearly definable prints on the path that the three followed through the snow. The tracks led them from the river, across the railroad, and across the main highway. Whatever had made them had stepped over a 43-inch high, 5-strand wire fence, judging by the single prints of the left and the right feet on either side of the fence. On the far side of the fence, in a cluster of pine trees, there was a marked depression in the ground among the pine needles, apparently where some heavy animal had rested. No one denies the possibility that this was made by a cow or deer. There are plenty of each in the area, but its presence in the line of the crippled tracks is worth noting, as is the fact that right in the center of the depression was a clump of snow holding the imprint of the toes of the left foot, as though the snow had been shaken loose after building up on the foot. In the clearing beyond the pine trees were hundreds more tracks, leading across the flat land and up a small hillside. In the heat of what appeared to be the moment of truth, Rene, discarding his customary caution, cried, "Now we're going to get that hairy son of an expletive." He figured the prints were going to lead on up the hill and the hunters would be able to run whatever had made them into the ground. But the prints stopped, halfway up the hill, turned, and retraced their path downward. At one spot, between 2 side-by-side prints, the hunters discovered a deep yellow patch in the snow, apparently urine. It was probably against their best interest that they neglected to collect the yellow snow. Analysis might have given some clue as what made it. The prints continued down the hill, parallel with their first ascending path, returned to the fence, and crossed it again about 50 feet from the first step over. From there, the tracks led the hunters across the road and back and over the fence several times, and eventually across the road and the railroad, through a patch of bush and to the edge of a steep part of the riverbank, about 150 feet above the water. There, the bank was overhanging. The tracks turned and went upstream for approximately 200 feet to a point where the bank sloped gradually down the river, and then they stopped. All the way down, the bank was a deep groove, as one made by a heel and a foot, acting as a brake for an upright body skiing down the bank. Below that, there was just rocks, no further markings. One thought hammered repeatedly in Dahinden's mind, the thought that had prompted his earlier optimistic exclamation. The tracks were fresh, not more than 15 hours old. He had checked the area the previous evening, and it had been bare. Nevertheless, his characteristic caution was at work again. He was stirred all right, but his mind persisted in herding suspicions and pushing them to the front. Why did the tracks happen to be just there, where he would be sure to go every day, where he checked all the time, within a few miles of the garbage dump, where the thing had been reportedly seen all the time? It was the obvious place for a hoaxer to plan his work. On the other hand, it had seemed impossible that anyone could have faked such minute anatomical detail as was evident in the crippled print. Another point, too, if they did fake it, how did they not leave their own prints while they were faking it in the snow? He walked the route of the tracks 7 times, examining every print, puzzling over them. Assuming they were real, where had the thing come from and where had it gone to? Had it crossed the river upstream or downstream, and if so, how far away in which of those directions? There are numerous reports in the history of the Sasquatch of the creatures swimming rivers and lakes. The questions were obvious and easy to ask, but were impossible to answer, given the group's limited resources. Dahinden, applying lessons he had learned at places such as Bluff Creek, where people seeing a print had sprinted off in every conceivable direction looking for its owner, leaving the print to the ravages of the first rain shower or the first curious onlooker and his dog, concentrated on the footprints, trying to deduce as much as possible from them. The right print showed more compression than the left, suggesting that the body weight was more to the right, further suggesting that the right leg was shorter than the left as a result of whatever mishap, congenital or otherwise, had caused the evident malformation. Renee speculated that the creature had at one time suffered an accident that had caused dislocation of the shin bone. Some of the prints were lifted from the snow and kept in Marx's freezer for a while. They were eventually discarded when the hunters developed one of their periodic collective depressions, generally attributed to science's marked apathy toward their endeavors. As it was, their interest would soon be riveted on another freezer and its alleged contents. Renee's preoccupation with the prints disturbed Norm Davis. Rather than worrying about establishing the legitimacy of old ones, Davis thought they should be out chasing new ones. Accordingly, he phoned Titmus and others and suggested that Renee was neglecting the hunt, and their presence was needed to get things back into gear. While they went about setting their affairs straight in their various locations before moving on Bosburg, the prints continued to attract general interest. Tourists tramped about, their curiosity tweaked by news stories, as did most of the sheriff's office members and officers from Border Patrol. A bus driver on the trail, British Columbia to Spokane run, something of a Sasquatch buff himself, caught sight of Renee one day just off the highway filming the cripple's prints. He slammed on the brakes, hauling the bus to a halt just before the railway crossing, then reversed 100 yards or so and drove the bus into the side of the road. Then, briefly explaining to his passengers that there were some Sasquatch tracks he had to see, he left them gaping out of the windows while he trotted over with his box camera to record his own souvenir of the malformed foot. Can you imagine that happening today? 5 days after the finding of the tracks, a U.S. Border Patrol man discovered sets of what appeared to be the same ones on the far side of the river, presumably where the thing had either entered or left the water. These tracks were in an area normally closed to all but a logging company's personnel, and unfortunately, they were largely washed out by recent rains. There were the toe marks, seemingly matching the cripple's, but little else that could be defined. By this time, Renee had been joined by Roy Fardell from British Columbia and Roger St. Hilaire, a young zoologist from San Fran. Together, they considered the question of faking. On this side of the river, the prints were perfectly located for discovery. On the other side, they were in a spot virtually never used, where all access gates were kept locked by the logging company. If the prints on this side had been faked, surely whoever had made them would have planted the ones on the far bank in an equally accessible place to complete the hoax. This persistent reversion into pessimism over tracks and other evidence is as much a constant of the serious Sasquatch hunter's character as is his determination to solve the mystery. The consensus, while it remained firm, was that the tracks were genuine. Wait, I'm not getting this. So they're saying that if the prints were faked on the side where no one would spot them, then they would be faked on the side where they could be spotted? I mean, that seems kind of backwards. Like, why would someone fake tracks where no one would discover them? Especially if they're doing over 1,000. That's a lot of hard work. I mean, I don't know. That's kind of weird. At this point, Roger Patterson, with his partner Dennis Jensen, came to Bosburg. He would be there intermittently during the saga that followed. Jensen would hang in the whole time, protecting their dual interests. The search for the cripple went on through December and into January, using four-wheel drive vehicles, light planes, and snowmobiles. The hunters... planes, trains, and automobiles. They should make a movie of this. With Steve Martin and John Candy. Hunting Bigfoot instead of trying to get home to their family for Christmas. So the hunters covered hundreds of square miles of rugged country, plowing over mountain ridges and through dense brush. And all the time, Renee lived with the wriggling thought that they maybe were following a phony. The longer they went without finding a trace of the cripple, the worse the suspicions grew, and more of the others began to share the doubts. Misgivings went around the group like the Hong Kong flu, as each of the hunters nurtured doubts about the others. Infidelities were imagined, old but forgotten conflicts resurrected. As it happened, it wasn't each other they had to worry about, at that point anyway. In January, Renee took another shot at making the Patterson film pay, this time on a showing circuit of the Calgary area. He would be a distant but pivotal participant in the main feature. One evening at the end of January, two men arrived at the Sasquatch hunters' camp on the Marks property. Joe Metlow, a prospector, and Bill Streeter, a state wildlife agent. Metlow's first question to the hunters was, what was their price on a Sasquatch? It was explained to him in somewhat noble fashion by Dennis Jensen that money was hardly a consideration compared with the importance to science of establishing the creature's existence. And besides, he pointed out, getting hold of a Sasquatch was much more involved problem than Metlow seemed to appreciate. But I've got one, Metlow said, and it's sold. Nobility and scientific priorities fled. We'll top your best offer, Jensen countered. At this point, Fardell and St. Hilaire were somewhere in the wings. The first act was Jensen's alone. Metlow's story was that on January 27th, while out running claim lines at a location he wouldn't name for the moment, he had come up behind a cream-colored Sasquatch at a distance of about 80 yards. He said he could make out only its back and that it appeared to be digging ferns out of knee-deep snow and eating the roots. Metlow noted that the surrounding area was well trampled and he felt the creature was making its home close by. He had brought Streeter along to confirm the story. Streeter was able to confirm that that was the story Metlow had told him. After that, he faded in a most judicious move from the picture. Throughout the discussion that followed, Metlow, displaying all the time an astonishing facility for avoiding specifics, somehow gave the impression to Jensen that not only did he know where the creature lived, but that he had immobilized it in an abandoned mine shaft. He said nothing more about how much he had offered or by whom. Jensen was sold. He stressed to Metlow that the only source of any money worth considering among the Sasquatch hunters was at Northwest Research Association, another name for Roger Patterson in Yakima, and that he would contact his principals immediately. He did, and Patterson directed him to keep the talking going and to keep the Dahinden crowd out of it. Schism. Metlow left, promising to keep in touch. Roy Fardell and Roger St. Hilaire, the Dahinden camp, knew something was poppin'. They managed to scrape together the bones of the story and, following some intricate detective work, came up with Metlow. After that, it wasn't too difficult to discover the approximate area where Metlow had been prospecting on the day in question. It was somewhere on Frisco Standard, a mountain a few miles to the north. While these deductions were being pursued, Roger Patterson was in touch with his backer, Tom Page, a wealthy Ohio executive who paid the former rodeo rider an annual retainer to be kept informed of every break in the Sasquatch search. Page flew out immediately, and he and Patterson met and huddled with Metlow, following which the Patterson camp moved its operation to a motel in Colville, 22 miles away. The divorce was final. Renee reflected on the split somewhat ruefully and certainly naively. I thought it had been all for one and one for all before this, but that's not the way it all worked out. The Dahinden camp, its leader in Calgary but in daily contact by telephone, stayed put in Ivan Marks's backyard. Dahinden's orders to the others were to stall and bluff to find out what Patterson and Page were offering and top it. Renee talked to Metlow by phone, but it was quite unable to determine whether the man had what he said he had. By now, Page was tossing around the figure of $35,000 for a Sasquatch, dead or alive. Metlow remained coy. Page had hired a helicopter from Spokane and had it on constant alert at Colville Airport, ready for immediate takeoff on exercise Sasquatch retrieval. The Dahinden camp was ready to move whenever the Patterson lot stirred. And there were others. A young newspaperman, Denny Stryker, of the Colville Statesman Examiner, who had been keeping journalistic track of the hunters' presence since the first sighting of the crippled print, could almost taste a massive scoop. If anyone from either camp moved, somehow Stryker was after him. In the absence of Maxwell, I'm going to have to say this, and this would make a good movie. He had a Jeep sitting in the bush, gassed up and ready to run at the first sign of action. At one point, he kept the Patterson Motel under observation for 72 hours straight, following a tip that the big move was imminent. And the ubiquitous Norm Davis was on the fringe of the action, tagging along with the Dahinden group. Sides were being taken by the usually non-partisan. The Border Patrol officers committed unofficially their help to the Dahinden side, their sense of fair play apparently offended by the selfish attitude suddenly displayed by the Patterson troop. Ivan Marks stayed neutral, warning Dahinden's men, "If you tell me anything and the other guys ask me, I'll tell them, so better not tell me anything." As friction grew between the two sides, the townspeople grew disenchanted with their one-time favorites. Where once they had stopped to pass the time of day with the adventurers who were keeping the Bosburg-Colville area on the news map, now they snubbed them and wished them and their double-dealing long gone. The hunters' predicament was perhaps best summarized by the one who said, "You couldn't step behind a tree to take a leak without feeling a dozen pairs of eyes on you." The opposing camps followed each other, snorting across the hills on snowmobiles, crisscrossing Frisco Standard and the surrounding region. On one occasion, Davis, outfitted in a startling red snowsuit several sizes too big for him, constantly had trouble keeping his seat. Periodically, he would roll off as the machine bounced off a ridge or hump and would flounder around up to his buttocks, like a flaming great snow bunny, as one participant later recalled. A thrashing red figure against the gleaming snow, while his companions plaintively called, "Hurry, you're going to lose them." Metlau was being coy about his Sasquatch. Finally, Page offered him $1,000 to confirm the area where he supposedly had the creature. Although no money changed hands, Metlau conceded that it was on Frisco Standard, but he declined to accompany the hunters to the spot. By this time, all concerned should probably have concluded that there was nothing to the prospector's story, but they were in the advanced stages of Sasquatch fever, blind to all reason. In a top-secret move, Patterson and Page and group whipped off in their chopper, set down on the top of Frisco Standard, and took to snowshoes. The Dehinden squad was not outdone. A local sympathizer with their cause had provided a light plane for the price of the cost of fuel. The moment that Patterson and Page left their machine, the enemy small plane came buzzing around the mountain, playfully wagging its wings at them as they flapped about in the deep powder snow. It was now that the Border Patrol man was moved to make his prediction. I could see the end of it. A shootout on Frisco Standard. 1 dead Sasquatch and a dozen dead hunters. And indeed, one of the most bloody-minded of the Dehinden squad vowed that should the Patterson-Page chopper be sighted homeward bound with the Sasquatch strapped to the skids, it would be blasted from the Bosburg skies. Wow, I mean, these are some vindictive Sasquatch hunters. Metlau was still accepting no offers, but still was making noises that kept the bidding healthy. Dehinden's men were phoning Renee at 2 a.m. with daily reports. The bids crept up. 35,000, 40,000, 50,000. Top them, Dehinden ordered. At the same time, he phoned John Green, asking him to get down to Bosburg to watch over their interests. Green went, but according to Jensen, apparently overcome by the same motives that were fueling the whole fiasco, spent most of his time galloping between the two camps, seeing where the best deal lay for himself. I mean, this would make a good movie just based on these wheeling and dealing individuals, not even about the Sasquatch specifically, but the tactics and strategies of wheeling and dealing between different camps of individuals. From this came the rift that more or less broke the one-time close Dehinden-Green partnership. Renee's final bid, made as he recalls from a motel in Calgary where I was without a pot to piss in, was for $55,000. It was enough to call Metlau's bluff. The prospector walked away from the affair, still uncommitted as to the truthfulness or otherwise of his story. Whether Renee could have raised the $55,000 remains academic, but chances are that he couldn't. So this is a broke guy in a motel offered $55,000. Metlau wasn't finished with the hunters yet, though. When the Frisco Standard smoke had cleared, Renee, by now back in Bosburg and an apparent moment of truth with the Patterson team, paid a visit with Jensen to Metlau's home. Conversation was general and quite genial until Metlau casually mentioned that he had a Sasquatch foot in his freezer. The fur hit the fan again. This should be this whole movie should be called "When the Fur Hits the Fan." Renee immediately offered $500 for one peek at the exhibit. Metlau raised him to $5,000. The excitement brought Davis to the scene, antennae quivering. Before you could say Bigfoot, Davis had a contract sketched out. It would include John Green to write the book, Bob Titmus to skin and dissect the foot's owner, presumably stashed in a cave somewhere above the snow line, and anthropologist Dr. Grover Krantz to introduce it to science. Renee was out, so was Patterson. Renee was still trying to assess Metlau. Did he or did he not have something? He spun a fine yarn, but it was very, very flexible. Now Metlau modified his foot story. The thing wasn't actually in his freezer. It was in a freezer at his sister's home near Portland, where he had sent it for safekeeping. They would have to go there to retrieve it. Right, said Davis, and sprung for 2 return air tickets. By now, money was running at flood volume between Davis and those he had named to the contract, but it was all on paper and destined to stay there, except for what Davis lost in his flush of enthusiasm to make more. Davis and Metlow set out for Spokane from where they would emplane for Portland. Only one of them made it. On the way to the plane from the Spokane terminal building, Metlow slipped on some ice and injured his ankle. He had to have it treated, he judged, before going anywhere. You go on to Portland, he said. I'll get this fixed, and then I'll get the next flight out. Like a lamb, Davis followed the instructions and flew off to Portland, where he waited 2 days. He could have waited much longer. Metlow, not the wasteful sort, apparently had cashed in his plane ticket, bought a couple of bottles of the best-tasting painkiller, and retired to his home to rest the injury. Davis phoned frantically and in vain from Portland, then returned. I was real sick. I couldn't make it, Metlow explained. But why didn't he just give his sister instructions to show him the foot? I mean, why does he have to be there? The Metlow chase was exhausted. While the prospector never did concede that he was operating a hoax, or worse, it was obvious to the Sasquatch squads that they'd been had. Several of the police officers in the area who had followed the developments with a mixture of amusement and incredulity suggested seriously to Renee that the prospector should be invited into the bush and persuaded to clear the whole thing up. They swore they would look determinedly the other way. But Renee settled for warning Metlow in somewhat dramatic fashion to the prospector's expressed concern that wherever he went from then on, he would be under surveillance by a considerable network of electronic bugging devices. Metlow faded gracefully from the scene. That doesn't sound graceful. Davis attempted to save some face by accusing Renee of souring the deal by offering $55,000 that he obviously didn't have. But that was for a Sasquatch that Metlow didn't have either, Renee rationalized. The episode had cost everyone money and had made all of them appear gullible, though some more than others. Renee says of it, it's a pity it happened. It was stupid and it gave the business a bad name. But then, in a way, I'm not sorry it happened. It taught me a lot about the people I'd been working with. The Sasquatch hunters packed their gear and cleared out of the Bosburg region. The Metlow intrusion, while it demonstrated perhaps one good reason why scientists generally tended to steer clear of the Sasquatch business, did not in any way help to answer or clarify the issue of the crippled prints that had brought Renee and others to Bosburg in the first place. It served only to take attention away from them, and the mystery wasn't helped any by what happened next in continuing the Bosburg saga. And here we consider the film mentioned earlier in the chapter. But hold on a second then. So, if there is some kind of government Sasquatch conspiracy, anytime there are real prints, would they pay off some guy to say he has a body or make a fake video that way to kind of overshadow the real prints? Is that how a conspiracy would operate? And it seems that it's relatively successful because the hoaxes seem to get all the attention. Back in Vancouver, Renee kept his finger on the Bosburg pulse through regular telephone contact with Ivan Marks. And it seemed that every time he called, Marks had found something. A handprint here, a footprint there, signs of an unusually heavy creature bedding down in the bush, always something to keep the trail warm. Marks phoned him one evening in October 1970 and said, I've got a film of the cripple. The hows and wherefores of the filming were reported in the Colville Statesman Examiner under the byline of Denny Stryker, late of the Metlow pursuit. On the night of October 6th, an unidentified person called to Mark's home, leaving a vague message that either a car or train had struck a large upright creature on the highway about 7 miles north of Bosburg. Marks was away at the time, but when he received the message, he left immediately for the area with a hunting dog he hoped would follow the spoor of the Sasquatch, if indeed that's what it actually was. Marks was armed with nothing more than a Bolex 16mm movie camera with a 17mm lens, a 35mm Nikon, and a two-way radio, which he had contact with rancher Don Byington, who was in the area by the time Marks's dog located the creature. The day was heavily overcast with smoke when Marks jumped the creature in the bottom of a dense draw and began filming. The initial footage shows a large black upright figure moving stealthily but rapidly through the dense growth, but only in silhouette. Marks pressed the pursuit with his hound, forcing the Sasquatch into a clearing where his movie camera set at a 2.8 f-stop, he took the remarkably clear footage of an impressive-looking creature. On the screen, the Sasquatch is shown moving from right to left at an angle of about 45 degrees away from the photographer. Distance from the subject, according to Marks, ranged from 25 feet to more than 100 feet as it made its way into the heavy underbrush on the far side of the clearing. Probably the most impressive part of the film, besides its extreme clarity, is the fact that the Sasquatch is visibly injured, holding its right arm tightly to its chest and using its long muscular arm for compensating balance. Also, both ankles of the creature seem badly skinned, the wounds showing plainly raw against the black hair of the legs and feet. In watching the frames singly, the injured or skinned area appears to extend onto the bottom of one foot and possibly on both feet, which would account for the apparent pain-filled movements of the frightened creature. As the Sasquatch is nearing the far side of the clearing, a twisted tree limb is stepping on, bouncing up, and striking it above knee level. Marks, the following day, photographed this stick, which was 10 feet long. In comparison, the creature photographed would have stood about 9 feet tall, and Marks estimated its weight as that of 2 large bears, or around 700 to 800 pounds. The only thing the film is lacking is a facial feature on the creature. Twice, while crossing the clearing, the Sasquatch turned its head to glare at Marks. The first time it turned 180 degrees and uttered a weird scream, which was heard by Byington, positioned on a ridge nearby. The second time, it turned a full 360 degrees, appearing quite confused, but the lack of light prevented any facial features from showing plainly. Marks said he continued pursuit of the creature until darkness prevented further advance, and when the trail was recovered the following day, it led through a maze of rugged terrain and finally to a body of water where it was lost. He feels the Sasquatch is very old and apparently hurt quite badly. Anybody else feel sad about this story? I mean, even if this thing is just whatever, an ape of some kind, it's still sad. I mean, this is an injured creature running for its life and being hunted and filmed. Stryker finished the story with a statement from Renee, who had arrived in Bosburg. Ivan has a movie, and that leaves only 2 choices. Either it is real, or it is not. That's what I'm here to find out. The story had been released to the wire services, and the second siege of Bosburg was underway. Davis was right back into the fray, tossing offers around for the film. Author Ivan Sanderson phoned on behalf of Argosy magazine, and the usual crowd of Sasquatch devotees was there. Tom Page flew in, dangling before Marks a check for $25,000 for the film or a copy of it. He made the proposition possibly out of desperation, in light of his earlier experience at Bosburg, that Marks could have the check if he would confirm or deny the authenticity of the film. Whether he would have honored the offer if Marks had said the film was faked is moot, but nonetheless an intriguing question. The fact that Marks declined the offer should have loaned immediately to the film at least a touch of uncertainty. Most of the hunters were saying for publication that Marks had the genuine article. Renee conceded reluctantly that such might be the case, more from a desire to believe Marks's wife, whom he respected and liked, and who was confirming her husband's story, than from conviction. John Green arrived and wasted no time in declaring the film authentic. He offered Marks $800 for a copy, of which Action Renee reflects dryly, I guess he wanted 2 Sasquatch films, the other being the Patterson film. Green was moved to write a tribute to Marks for the pages of Bigfoot Bulletin, a mimeograph publication sent out intermittently from a base in Oakland, California. Part of it read, I am satisfied that he could not have faked all he has to show and that the film is genuine. Don Byington, the rancher who had been within walkie-talkie distance of Marks when the film was shot, had 2 young children, and these youngsters, from the time the film was first shown, were heard to murmur that they knew well the location of the filming. Marks had kept the spot secret. No one paid them any heed. The film stayed in limbo, and the winter marched on. Still, Marks had taken no offer for his film, and had released no part of it for publication in any medium. Then on the scene came Peter Byrne, a British adventurer and hunter who had been part of the Tom Slick sponsored expeditions in the Himalayas and in Northern California. Byrne still had a source of financing, and he and Marks came to an agreement. Marks would be paid a monthly retainer as a Sasquatch hunter of $750, and his film would be placed in a bank safety deposit box as security. This arrangement carried through to the spring of 71, Marks being comfortably subsidized to pursue his hunting while at the same time having to make no commitments about the film. But Peter Byrne was considerably less gullible than might have seemed. The children of Don Byington kept harping, as kids will, about how they knew exactly where the film had been shot, and the always wise Peter Byrne listened to them. The children led the hunters to a spot at the back of the Byington property, immediately recognizable as the film site. In the film, the creature brushes its head against a tree limb. The limb was located and was found to be less than 6 feet from the ground, shaking Marks's estimate of 9 feet for the creature's height. And a comparative film indicated that certain features on the Marks film could not have appeared as they did if he had filmed from the spot he said he had filmed from, and with the equipment he said he had used. It was then established through Peter Byrne's persistent probing that Marks's camera on the day of filming was equipped with a telephoto lens and not, as he had said, a regular one. And finally it was discovered that shortly before the film was taken, Marks had been buying a considerable quantity of fur pieces in Spokane. The case fell apart, Marks by this time having left the area. The unkindest cut came from Peter Byrne when he went to the bank to inspect his security and found only a roll of black, exposed celluloid. Later, Marks claimed to the others that he had taken and passed a lie detector test over the incident and had passed it, but no one ever knew when or where this had occurred. Renee's response to the claim is a cryptic, "I'm sure he could take one any time and pass it with flying colors." What does that mean? He's a great liar and he feels nothing in lying? There was a sequel to Marks's fling at cinematography in the fall of 72. On Saturday, October 21st, he appeared on You Asked For It, a U.S. television show that pursued odd and interesting items at the request of its entranced audience. This time, Marks was both the requestee and one of the subjects. He appeared with the show's host, clutching a sealed can of movie film of a creature he said he had photographed during a snowstorm in Northern California. Marks's never-ending search for the truth had once more culminated in his seeing a Sasquatch, this time a white one. He had followed it through the deepening snow until he realized he could predict its route and, as he quaintly put it, headed off at the pass. This he did, having enough time to set up his camera, tripod and all, before the thing lurched into view. The TV host then explained that Marks had brought the film straight from the camera unprocessed and that the show's producer would print the film under the strictest of supervision and would then examine it. Following a commercial break, we were flashed ahead in time to where the film had been processed and we saw the subject. It was marvelously clear and outrageous. A primate expert whom TV people had co-opted for an opinion said it best, quote, "I think it's a man in a beast's suit," end quote. It certainly was someone in a beast's suit. Great folds of the suit swung around like an old army blanket amid the California snows as the thing cavorted before the camera, now running comically towards it, now turning about and gallivanting off through the drifts, flipping its clumsy feet backwards and sideways as one does when running through deep snow in an overcoat. It seemed almost to be chuckling as it went. Whether Marks was the perpetrator or the victim of a hoax in this case will likely remain unanswered, but there was little doubt that we were watching was a snow job in a blizzard. So the crippled footprints of 1969 had set in motion a chain of events that went full circle and arrived at nothing, while the prints themselves for the time being virtually forgotten. The events that had undoubtedly placed under a cloud the search for the Sasquatch and those few who, like Renee, remained seriously and honestly devoted to it. While the Bosburg exercises proved apparently more entertainment than anything else, they are anything but irrelevant in the Sasquatch saga. For Renee especially, they were enlightening. He saw what he had regarded for the most part as trust between a few people with a unique interest disintegrate into suspicion, deceit, and raw optimism when the chips were down. Renee is an honest man, and the display disgusted him. But more than that, and more important to him, if he had not been convinced before, he certainly knew now that among his colleagues, gullibility, in increased in direct proportion to any incentive that held the shape of a dollar. Rene said a great deal about his colleagues, probably without realizing it, when he told the intrepid Danny Stryker at the end of one interview, quote, "We're an exclusive group, us Sasquatch hunters, largely because no one wants to join us," end quote. Now, with histrionics concluded, we can return to the crippled footprint and for the argument for its authenticity, to Napier. In Chapter 5 of Bigfoot, Napier, after a complex explanation of foot anatomy, which need not be fully pursued here, concludes that there are two kinds of Sasquatch prints, which he catalogs as the hourglass and the human types. The hourglass, so named because of its shape, is the kind found at Bluff Creek. The human is the Bosburg print. While Napier stresses that the differences between the two walking patterns would, if both types are assumed to be genuine, indicate two species of Sasquatch, and concludes that such a possibility is beyond reason, he still is able to make a case for the validity of both. This, of course, wait, why would it be beyond reason? there could be a lot of different species. This, of course, presents a radical contradiction, but that is nothing new in the Sasquatch story, and must wait for an answer until the whole issue is finally resolved. After explaining that the hourglass prints provide a strong case for acceptance because of their persuasive consistency and their variability, in that the variety of anatomical detail they display, as opposed to the uniformity one would expect from a fake, is perfectly in tune with nature. Napier says, quote, "Apart from satisfying the criteria established for modern human-type walking, the Bosburg prints have, to my way of thinking, an even greater claim to authenticity. The right foot of the Bosburg Sasquatch is a club foot, a not uncommon abnormality. The forepart of the foot is twisted inwards, the third toe has been squeezed out of normal alignment, and possibly there has been a dislocation of the bones in the outer border. But this last feature may be due to an imperfection in the casting technique. Clubfoot usually occurs as a congenital abnormality, but it may also develop as the result of severe injury or of damage to the nerves controlling the muscle of the foot. To me, the deformity strongly suggests that the injury during life was responsible. A true, untreated congenital clubfoot usually results in a fixed flexion deformity of the ankle in which the part of the foot and toes touch the ground in normal standing. In these circumstances, the heel impression would be absent or poorly defined, but in fact, the heel indentation of the Sasquatch is strongly defined. I conclude that the deformity was the result of a crushing injury to the foot during early childhood. It is very difficult to conceive of a hoaxer so subtle, so knowledgeable, and so sick who would deliberately fake a footprint of this nature. I suppose it is possible, but it is so unlikely that I am prepared to discount it." I'm not prepared to discount it. I find it more interesting that there's over 1,000 prints. Because if you're going to go through that kind of detail to fake it, a dedicated hoaxer might do that. There's some dedicated hoaxers out there. But how long would it take to make over 1,000 prints in deep snow without someone leaving their own prints? It's kind of weird. Here we can leave the Bosburg story and the cripple for now. Final quote here by Dr. John Napier: "Either some of the footprints are real, or all are fakes. If they are all fakes, then an explanation invoking legend and folk memory is adequate to explain the mystery. But if any of them is real, then as a scientist we have a lot to explain. Among other things, we shall have to rewrite the history of human evolution. We shall have to accept that Homo sapiens is not the one and only living product of the hominid line, and we shall have to admit that there are still major mysteries to be solved in a world we thought we knew so well." Again, the hubris of mankind knows no limits. While it is encouraging that Dr. Napier conceded the possible need to rewrite established theories, his formula is very much an oversimplification, especially where the question of faked footprints is concerned. No matter how many legends and folk memories are invoked, the question would remain how the prints were faked. Napier himself stressed the virtual impossibility of someone being equipped to construct a fake, such as that of the Bosburg cripple. Okay. So, yeah, that's a tough one. With all these little details here, because it's kind of hard to say, did these guys just disappear into the ether when it came time to prove their claims because they were lying? Or because they were intimidated and threatened into it, and part of the threat was not to blow the whistle on so-called men in black that were executing this cover-up? Because if there's a conspiracy and cover-up, and I'm not saying there is, I know the Dunning-Kruger crowd loves to pretend, all the scientism cultists jump in claiming that I'm saying there's some kind of conspiracy. I'm explicitly stating I am not saying there's any kind of conspiracy. I'm saying if there's one, how would it be done if there was one? So would they threaten people and make them disappear? So those are just some of many, many different accounts of Bigfoot bodies. If you haven't checked out the previous MindShock episodes on Bigfoot, we also went over the Bigfoot allegedly recovered, multiple Bigfoot, some of them alive, recovered in the Mount St. Helens explosion with documentation. So make sure to check those out. But yeah, Bigfoot bodies have been reported. I mean, there's a lot more anecdotal cases with which we will be going over in the future as well as Bigfoot attacks on humans. Plenty more Bigfoot episodes coming out on Mindshock, where we will attempt to separate fact from fiction without falling for any logical fallacies, like they do on all mainstream shows or even other non-mainstream podcasts. For some reason, most people are just not concerned with validity, which, of course, logic is the basis of what is valid, what is not valid. Falling for logical fallacies would be in line with invalidity. Now, again, we also have to keep the logical fallacy, the fallacy in mind. Just because something's a logical fallacy doesn't mean a certain point is true or untrue. But this is Mind Shock, where the only thing we know for sure is that we don't know anything for sure. Hope you guys enjoyed another edition of the Mind Shock podcast. If you want to help support the podcast, help bring logic and reason back to a world where it's quickly going extinct, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description to become a YouTube member right here on YouTube for access to exclusive streams and chats. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, like and share, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topological analysis, co-podcast requests. You can also be a guest on the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys